Shalom, peace and blessings. Welcome to the Fourth Angels Learning Center. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. This is going to be a continuation of our Fruit of the Spirit study. My name is Jadiel, and today's fruit we're going to be dealing with is the fruit of long suffering. This is going to be pretty interesting. Again, all of the fruits usually connect in some aspect, in some way. They manifest together, so it's very important that we understand the clear understanding of each one, so that way we can examine the fruit properly, not only outside when we're looking at other people, but also and mainly when we're looking at and examining ourselves. So the first thing I want to do is lay down a few fundamental points, as I did with the other ones before this. First one is that long suffering, Galatians chapter 5, looking at verse 22. Long suffering is a noun. It is a noun. It is something that is manifested from a desire or establishment inside of the person's mind. It is a characteristic that is a part of Yah, that is now a part of you, and then it is manifested in action. It is an action that's manifested from a place of establishment inside of your mind. So we have to understand this. For something to be a noun, it means that this is what you are. It's not what you do only, but this is what you are. Now, what you are should manifest out of your heart, out of you. And this is what the fruit of the Spirit is teaching us. That Yah wants to, by the Spirit, place his character in our mind, establish it in our character, so that way it can be a part of us. And because it's a part of us, it can manifest during different times of our walk with him, during different times of struggle or different times of stress. So this is interesting, looking at this word long suffering. So you can clearly see that the word suffering is in there. So Yah wants us to be able to suffer a certain way. Scripture talks about suffering long. It uses this phrase. It makes it either long suffering or suffer long. The word long is an emphasis on endurance. So suffering long or enduring suffering. If you look at the Greek word, it means longanimity, meaning endurance, forbearance. And then it also mentions the phrase patience. And the phrase patience, if you look at where this comes from, it says from the same as G31:16, and it says it's a compound, meaning enduring temper or restraining your temper. So long suffering is a attribute. It's an attribute of control. It's an attribute of authority over not only over your temper, but over your suffering, over your response. How you would respond when you are suffering is what this is going to address. Let's look at a few verses. Let's go to the book of James, James chapter 5, and we're going to look at verse 7. All right, and verse 7 says, "Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the master, and behold, this husbandman waits for the precious fruit of the earth, and has long patience for it, until he receives the early and latter rain." So this is the characteristic that he's putting on farmers, right? So he's using a husbandman. A husbandman is usually either a farmer or a vine dresser, someone who has a garden, right? And they're not anxious. They're waiting for the manifestation or the production of something. They're not being moved off of their great desire for it. They're not saying, I want it now. But what they're doing is they're establishing their mind in peace. We talked about peace in the last video, but they're establishing their mind in control. They're establishing their mind and causing themselves to actually wait for what is told to them or what's going to be given to them, right? So it says, be patient, therefore, unto the coming of the master. So we ought to endure and not be anxious ahead of time and lose sight of what's coming, just like the farmer. The farmer, even though he may be hungry at the moment, he's not going to lose sight of the crops that's going to grow in its due season. You see what I'm saying? So we have to understand the importance of it. It says, be also patient and establish your hearts, for the coming of the master is drawing near. So it's very important that we understand that our patience is it's a controlling of our emotions. It's a controlling of our mind, that we may be able to wait patiently without being consumed by our desires. Let's look at another verse. Let's go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, looking at verse 4, it says, love or charity suffers long. Love suffers long. Love suffers endurance. Love endures suffering, meaning that we are able, when dealing with people that we love, we are able to endure or patiently wait for the learning process. When dealing with my son, my children actually, there's a long suffering. There's a desire that I have for them to do things correctly. So in order for me to properly teach them and allow them to manifest that proper way of doing things, I have to be patient. Now, the reason why I have to be patient is because they may not do things correctly until they do it correctly. They're developing, right? So they're exercising. So if I love my son, I'm not going to condemn him for those things. Now, there may be times where you get frustrated or you get discouraged and you get disappointed, and you have to be able to control those emotions. Sometimes when you don't control those emotions, it comes out in frustration towards your child or frustration towards another person. And love is supposed to manifest that motivation to wait, that motivation to endure when another person is not necessarily fully revealing the potential that you want them to reveal. So love suffers long. Love endures suffering. Okay, let's look at a few verses in the book of Numbers talking about Yah's character, especially towards us. This is kind of very clear to see how Yah deals with his people, shows how long he suffered as well. So it says here in verse 18, Yah is long suffering and great mercy, forgiving iniquity and trespass and transgression, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the third and fourth generation, but he is long suffering. He endures with his people. He endures with us. He suffers. It's not that he's just simply seeing us and then, oh yeah, I forgive you. It's no, there when we are walking contrary to Yah, when we are even thinking contrary to Yah, it's not something that Yah takes lightly. It grieves him. It affects him. So it's interesting. Anything that's a grievance to you, it's a suffering. It's a characteristic of suffering. So we have to understand how to endure this grief. We have to endure the suffering. We have to endure the frustration and the disappointment and the pain and the stress. It's a characteristic of enduring through those things. Let's look at, just as Yah has endured through many things dealing with his people, dealing with people in general. Let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 15. Look at what he says. We're going to look at verse 15. It says, "Oh Yah, remember me and visit me and revenge me of my persecutors. Take me not away in your long suffering. Know that for your sake I have suffered rebuke. Take me not away in your long suffering. Know that for your sake I have allowed or suffered rebuke." So again, you see this person, Jeremiah, is dealing with a lot of pain. If you read the book of Jeremiah, you'll see that he's been dealing with being mocked, being beaten, being ridiculed, thrown in prison, thrown in pits, thrown in cages, to the point where he wanted to quit at one point, quit speaking on behalf of Yah. But he, being filled with the Spirit, was able to endure through those things for Yah's sake, to be rebuked for telling the truth for Yah's sake. And so we need to understand the patience that it takes, the power and the strength that it takes to endure through these things. There's many people who they quit and they give up and they watch the world look like destroy them all around them. They watch their circumstance eat at them inside of them. Sometimes stress and pain, and sometimes it's not about manifesting an action of these things. Sometimes it's about allowing it to fester in your mind, allow it to consume your mind. So again, bringing long suffering into the mind, into the heart of the person, the Spirit developing it in you. How can you endure suffering? Not by just physically restraining yourself, but you have to mentally restrain your thoughts as well. We talked about the word for peace. In order to manifest long suffering, you have to be able to execute peace. And how you execute peace is by keeping your mind stayed on Yah. We talked about that in the last video. Perfect peace have they that whose mind is stayed on you because you trust in you. So to trust in Yah is to suffer or endure suffering. Sometimes even in exercise, when people are working out, you have to trust the process. You understand that this process is true. This process will manifest the effects that you desire. So you are motivated and you are consistent and you endure through the muscle pains, the ripped muscles, and all of those things, the tiredness. You endure through those suffering in order to manifest the thing that you want to see. Same thing. We endure through these things that we go through in life because we know that the master is coming. We know that he's coming because he promised it and he's already proven himself to be trustworthy in each individual's lives. So 2 Timothy, let's look at chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4, looking at verse 2, it says, preach the word in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, and it says, and exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. Right? It says, for the time will come where they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall heap up to themselves, having itching ears. Interesting. It's telling us to preach. It's telling us to preach in season, out of season, meaning like in the right time and in the wrong time, to be ready to correct, to be ready to instruct, to be ready to rebuke, to be ready to encourage with long suffering and teaching and good teaching. So with restraint, we have to be patient. We have to be able to endure when people don't necessarily look like they're listening to you teaching. They don't necessarily agree with you. So they're going back and forth because of their misunderstanding. Or they have too many questions where it's, it becomes a little bit frustrating when you don't know if somebody's being facetious or not, And then it says here, when they cannot endure with you, look at what they do. In verse 3, for the time shall come when they will not endure sound doctrine. When they can't endure with you, they go look for people that's going to say and repeat and teach the same things that they want to teach and they want to hear. So this is very important that we understand. We have to make sure that we remain in this fruit when we see people moving away from the truth. When we see people rejecting you and rejecting the work that you're doing and rejecting the desires that you have for them, sometimes you can have a desire for somebody and saying, I really want you to understand. I really want you to walk in this truth. And the fact that they reject your desire for them, sometimes it hurts. It hurts, many times. But at the same time, you have to be able to endure that because many times those scenarios are just temporary where people may reject you for the moment. But Yah, as Yah works, you'll see the working of Yah in their heart and they will change. They'll be transformed by the renewing of their mind. But we also need to endure the possibility that they may not want to change. So it's very important that we understand how to execute this aspect of being long suffering or enduring suffering. It is an attribute of the Spirit. The Messiah had to deal with that. So how much, should we not deal with it when our master had to deal with it himself? 1 Timothy chapter 1, looking at verse 15. It says, "This is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptation, that Messiah came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief." Right? So this is very important. This is a very important. Just thinking about how he came into this world, thinking about what he had to endure, thinking about what he had to deal with, thinking about his disciples constantly arguing with each other, constantly not understanding, thinking about people trying to test him, trying to trap him, trying to kill him. Look at what verse 16 says. It says, "Howbeit for this reason, I obtained mercy, that in me first, Yahushua Messiah, might show forth all long suffering for a pattern to them which should hereafter believe on him to everlasting life." He's desiring, because of Messiah coming into the world to save sinners, he is desiring for this long suffering to be in him so he can manifest the same pattern as the Messiah. To save sinners requires an endurance. You have to endure suffering, frustration, pain, fear, in order to do the work that Yah has for you. You have to endure tiredness sometimes. Sometimes you have to pray throughout the night. Sometimes you have to pray, when you don't want to pray. Sometimes you have to teach when you don't want to teach, when you want to sleep, when you want to sit down, when you want to relax. Sometimes you have to put that to the side and move forward in your work, in the work that you have to do. 1 Peter chapter 3, looking at verse 20, it says, "Which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of Elohim waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water." What is the long suffering he's referring to? The long suffering he's referring to in Genesis is that he gave them 120 years. He gave them 120 years to turn from their ways. It wasn't that Noah did not take 120 years to build the ark. He took 120 years to give them an opportunity to turn from their ways and to turn to the upcoming danger, to turn away from the upcoming danger and to turn to Yah in repentance. So let's look at this verse. This verse here, Hebrews chapter 6, looking at verse 15. It says, saying, "Surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you." It says, "And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise." This is talking about Abraham. Abraham being promised that he was going to receive a child. He was given this promise when he was 75 years old. He was given the promise of receiving a child and an heir around when he was 75 years old, and he did not obtain that promise until he was 100 years old. 25 years. Even when he had Ishmael, it was when he was 13. So 13 years after he had Ishmael is when he received the promise from Yah to have a child, that his seed may be multiplied by faith and established in faith. So it's very important that we understand endurance. Endurance is not an easy thing, which is why it's referred to as long suffering. Let me see if I could. There we go. So look at this verse. This verse is very important to us. It should be kind of like a go-to in our minds. It says here in Hebrews chapter 5, looking at verse 8, it says, "Though he was a son," right? "Yet he learned obedience by the things that he suffered." He learned obedience by the things that he suffered. "Being made perfect, he became the author or the causer of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him. So the fact that the Son obeyed while he was suffering or endured suffering and still maintain his consistency in his walk with Yah, his trust in his Father, his desire to fulfill the book, his desire to speak and teach the book during the unbelief, during the family members trying to set him up, during the people that he grew up with talking negatively about him, about his family. This is what he endured. He was obedient to Yah because of what he trusted in his Father. He trusted in his Father that whatever he says will come to life. Even if it's not coming to fruition at that moment, he believed that it will come to fruition. And that gave him strength to endure. We need to understand that that's what we need to understand. The restrain. We need to restrain the fear. We need to restrain the thoughts from going wherever it wants to go. We have to place our mind in the right place, and this will motivate us to endure during the present suffering that's right in front of our faces. The frustration, the disappointment, the pain, the fear, all of these things has to be restrained. Yah places the spirit inside of our minds to give us power. When he gives us power, it's supposed to enable us to be able to control these things. You understand? So controlling or enduring or waiting through or restraining yourself so that way you can allow time to move past, so you can allow Yah to come in his time, requires a strength that only the Spirit can provide. So this is not the same as endurance in the world. When people do not wait, they attempt to go and receive it on their own. We talked about exercise a little bit earlier. When people can't go through the process patiently, endure the suffering of the process patiently of, let's say, exercise, eating properly, what do people do? They get liposuction or they get muscle implants these days. There's so many weird stuff that's happening just to avoid having to wait. To avoid having to wait, people do very, very weird things. There's even times where people want to make money, and instead of waiting to make money, they steal. Or instead of waiting for money, they do they go and they do occupations that is dishonorable or is not good. It's not healthy wise, or it's not even good morally. It's not even good in your conscience, things that people feel guilty about, things that people kill themselves because they did not want to wait, and they end up doing something that they can't live with. So endurance is a very important attribute from Yah. It keeps and maintains the peace and the trust and the integrity that we're supposed to have in Yah. So I hope that we understand long suffering is a necessary attribute to wait on the master. It allows us to endure through things that is happening. It allows us to wait. You see what I'm saying? It allows us to wait and not respond with haste, to not respond with irrational mind, irrational thoughts, not to respond with emotion. It causes us to be restrained and controlled. This is extremely important in our walk today. There's many people who are so impatient. They open their mouth in impatience. You don't have to do something to show impatience. You could simply open your mouth to show that you're not enduring anymore. You could hear sometimes people say, I'm not going to take this anymore. Sometimes they don't do anything physically, but they start to yell, they start to scream, and they start to open their mouth and speak in a place of impatience, in a place of unrestraint. And this is probably one of the biggest things that Yah's people need to control, is their own ability to wait and endure. And I hope that this is clear, that we may have to pursue this attribute, that we may have to exercise this power that Yah has given to us, so that way we can manifest endurance the way that our master manifested it in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8, where he was obedient even through his suffering, that we ought to be obedient as well. And one of the things that he's asking us to be is long suffering. This is a command for us to endure through suffering the way his son did, the way he did. So praise Yah. I hope that this was a blessing. And please feel free to contact me. I look forward to the next study. Shalom.